They didn't need proof, they only needed her name. Naomi Carter, 32, the only black woman on the 47th floor, stood under cold glass lights while a senior executive pointed and the CEO said nothing. No questions, no defense. Just a verdict everyone was ready to believe. But Naomi didn't argue. She asked for access. And when she touched the system, the boardroom turned into a courtroom. Logs lit up. Timelines locked in and the truth didn't whisper. It named the man who blamed her. In seconds, power flipped. Silence shattered. And the story they believed collapsed. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The silence on the 47th floor. New York, early winter. A pale gray sky hung low over Manhattan, and the glass towers reflected a cold, indifferent light. From the 47th floor, the city below looked distant, almost unreal, like something separated from consequence. Inside the boardroom, the air felt colder than the sky outside. Naomi Carter stood alone at the end of a long, polished table that reflected every movement, every hesitation, every unspoken judgment. Naomi Carter was a 32-year-old African-American woman, tall with a slim but resilient build. Her deep brown skin carried a natural radiance that no artificial light could soften. Her face was defined. High cheekbones, full lips, and intelligent, dark brown eyes that missed very little. Her natural black curls rested just at her shoulders, slightly untamed but deliberate, like she refused to conform in ways that mattered. She wore a charcoal gray tailored suit, clean, simple, professional, without any attempt to stand out, yet impossible to ignore. She stood straight, composed, but there was something else in her posture. Familiar isolation. Naomi had never been part of the inner circle. No powerful mentor had ever placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "I'll take you with me." No legacy name had ever opened doors before she even knocked. No quiet invitation had ever pulled her into the private conversations where real decisions were made. She had built everything alone, one project at a time, one late night after another, one problem no one else wanted to solve. There had been nights when the office lights turned off around her, one by one, until she was the last person left on the entire floor. Nights when security would do their rounds and pause, surprised to still find her there, eyes locked on a screen, solving something no one else had touched. Those nights had shaped her. Years ago, in her first role at the company, Naomi had watched a junior analyst, another black employee, quietly disappear after being blamed for a reporting error that was never fully investigated. No confrontation, no defense, just silence and a resignation email. That moment stayed with her. It taught her something she never forgot. In this building, silence could erase you. And today, she felt that same silence again. But this time, it was aimed directly at her. Her latest project should have changed everything. A predictive analytics system, complex, efficient, precise, designed to detect inefficiencies across the company's operations. It had already saved millions of dollars. Quietly, without celebration, without recognition. It was the kind of work that, in a different world, would have made her undeniable. But this was not that world. Across the table, several executives avoided looking at her. Some stared down at their notes. Others exchanged subtle glances, the kind that carried agreement without words. And then, the door opened. Daniel Whitmore walked in. Daniel Whitmore was a 58-year-old white American CEO, tall and lean with a presence that didn't demand attention. It assumed it. His pale skin contrasted sharply with the dark navy suit he wore, perfectly tailored. His face was angular, almost carved, with thin lips that rarely curved into anything resembling warmth. His steel blue eyes were sharp, analytical, and distant. His silver-gray hair was combed back with precision, reinforcing the image of control he carried into every room. He didn't greet anyone, didn't acknowledge the tension, didn't sit immediately. Instead, he walked to the center of the table and placed a thick file down with a firm, deliberate motion. The sound echoed more than it should have. Data has been leaked. No introduction, no context, just impact. The room went still. Not confused, not shocked. Still, as if everyone already understood the script they were about to follow. Daniel Whitmore lifted his gaze slowly, scanning the room once, measured, calculated, before stopping. On Naomi. Naomi Carter. Her name didn't feel like a question, it felt like a conclusion. A quiet shift moved through the room. Chairs adjusted, eyes lifted, and then they all landed on her. Some avoided her gaze immediately, as if looking too long might involve them. Others held their stare, but not out of curiosity, out of confirmation. They weren't asking if she had done it. They were recognizing a story that already made sense to them. At the far side of the table, a man leaned forward. Mark Reynolds. Mark Reynolds was a 50-year-old white American executive, tall with a broad, confident build. His light skin carried a faint flush that deepened when he spoke, and his square jaw tightened with restrained impatience. His gray eyes were sharp but cold, always calculating. His dark hair, streaked slightly at the temples, was slicked back carefully, and his expensive suit fit him like armor. He carried himself with the quiet certainty of someone used to being believed. He didn't hesitate. "I think we all know how serious this is," he said, his voice controlled but edged with urgency. This system was under Naomi's control. There it was, not an accusation, a direction, subtle, but clear. The room shifted again, this time more decisively. Mark leaned back slightly, folding his hands as if the matter was already unfolding exactly as expected. Naomi didn't react immediately. She let the silence settle, let it stretch, because she understood something most of them didn't. Silence could either bury you or expose everything. Near the end of the table, someone shifted nervously. Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole was a 24-year-old white American intern, medium height with a slim, slightly awkward build. His fair skin made him look younger than he was, and his messy brown hair never quite stayed in place. His blue eyes moved quickly, observant and uncertain, like he was constantly trying to understand a world he hadn't been fully prepared for. He wore a simple shirt with an ID badge that still looked too new. Ethan had only been at the company for 3 months, but even he could feel it. Something wasn't right. He glanced at Naomi, then at Mark, then back at Naomi, and for the first time since the accusation was spoken, he hesitated to believe it, because Naomi didn't look like someone cornered. She looked like someone thinking, carefully, deliberately, and that didn't match the story everyone else seemed ready to accept. Back at the center of the room, Daniel Whitmore remained still, watching, waiting, not intervening, not questioning, just observing how everything unfolded, which told Naomi something important. He wasn't stopping this. Naomi finally moved, one step forward, not defensive, not aggressive, controlled. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Too calm for the moment. "Give me system access," she said, a pause, then, more firmly, "right now." The reaction was immediate. A few executives shifted uncomfortably. One of them opened his mouth as if to object. Another shook his head slightly. Procedures, protocol, risk, all the usual words people used when they wanted to avoid truth. Mark frowned, just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough. Because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. Naomi wasn't supposed to step forward, she wasn't supposed to stay calm, she wasn't supposed to ask for control. But she had. And for the first time, the room felt uncertain. Daniel Whitmore watched her for a long second, then another. Something unreadable passed behind his eyes. Finally, he gave a small nod. The screens around the room flickered to life, and just like that, the silence changed, not gone, but different, heavier, because now The truth was about to be tested, and no one in that room was as certain as they had been just moments before. Naomi stepped toward the glowing screens, alone, but no longer powerless, and behind her, without anyone noticing, Ethan straightened in his seat, watching closely because whatever happened next, he knew this wasn't over. The system never lies. The screens came alive all at once. Cold light spilled across the glass walls, reflecting rows of data that stretched endlessly. Timestamps, access logs, encrypted sequences, system pathways layered over each other like a language only a few in the room could truly read. The boardroom no longer felt like a place for decisions. It felt like a place where something would be proven. Naomi stepped forward into the light. She didn't look back at anyone, didn't ask for permission again, didn't explain what she was about to do. She simply placed her hand on the console and began. Her fingers moved quickly, but not hurriedly. Every command was deliberate. Every window she opened, every dataset she filtered, followed a structure only she seemed to fully understand. The room, once full of quiet judgment, now shifted into a heavier silence, the kind that comes when certainty begins to weaken. Behind her, Ethan Cole leaned forward slightly in his chair. He didn't even realize he had stopped blinking. There was something different about this moment. Naomi wasn't reacting. She wasn't defending. She was building something. Piece by piece, truth. Ethan's eyes tracked the screens as lines of logs scrolled upward. Too fast for most people to follow, but not for him. He had spent the last 3 months studying systems like this, learning quietly, absorbing everything he could. And what he saw didn't match what he had been told. Naomi wasn't searching randomly. He already had a direction, a theory, and she was proving it. Across the table, Mark Reynolds shifted slightly in his seat. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. For the first time since he spoke, his confidence showed a crack. He adjusted his cuff, his jaw tightening just enough to betray tension. His gray eyes flicked briefly toward the screens, then away again, as if he preferred not to look too closely at what was unfolding. Naomi opened a new layer of data. System logs, last 48 hours, she said quietly, more to herself than to the room. Her voice was steady, unshaken. Another window appeared. Then another. She began aligning them. Timestamp to timestamp. Access point to access point. A pattern started to form. But something was off. Naomi paused. Not for long. Just enough. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then she moved again. Faster now. She isolated a segment of logs and expanded it across the main display. The numbers sharpened. The details became clearer. And suddenly the room leaned in without meaning to. Ethan felt it immediately. A shift. Something was wrong. Not with Naomi's data, with the data itself. He glanced at the side logs, background processes, minor system notes most people ignored. And then he saw it. A micro delay, a timestamp that didn't align perfectly. Less than a second. Almost invisible. But it shouldn't have been there. Ethan's breath caught slightly, because that kind of inconsistency didn't happen naturally. It had to be introduced. Naomi saw it too. Of course she did. She highlighted the anomaly without saying a word, zoomed in, expanded the sequence. The room stayed silent, but now it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't controlled. It was fragile. This log has been altered, Naomi said calmly, no emotion, no accusation, just fact. A few heads turned immediately. One of the executives shifted in his seat, frowning. Another leaned forward, squinting at the screen as if trying to understand something far outside his expertise. Daniel Whitmore remained standing, watching, still silent. Naomi continued. If this were a standard access chain, the timestamps would align sequentially, she said, her fingers moving again, overlaying multiple logs on top of each other. But here, she tapped the screen lightly, there's a break. Ethan felt a surge of recognition. She wasn't just defending herself, she was dismantling the narrative, one detail at a time. Mark Reynolds spoke again. This time his voice was tighter. "That doesn't prove anything," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Systems glitch. Logs can misalign." Naomi didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him. She just kept working. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. Because she wasn't engaging. She wasn't debating. She was replacing argument with evidence. On the screen, Naomi reconstructed the sequence. Step by step, she isolated the altered segment, then traced backward. Who accessed it? When? From where? Another log appeared. Then another. A chain began to form, not clean, but connected. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, because now it was leading somewhere, and it wasn't toward Naomi. Near the far end of the table, a woman who had been silent until now finally spoke. "Can someone confirm these logs?" she asked. Her name was Rachel Kim. Rachel Kim was a 38-year-old East Asian senior systems auditor, medium height with a composed, analytical presence. Her straight black hair fell just past her shoulders, framing a calm but sharp face. Her dark eyes moved quickly, absorbing detail with precision. She wore thin-rimmed glasses and a simple navy suit, practical and understated. Years ago, she had built her reputation by uncovering a financial discrepancy that saved the company millions. But the recognition had gone elsewhere. Since then, she trusted data more than people. She stood slowly, walked closer to the screen. Her gaze locked onto the anomaly Naomi had highlighted. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, "She's right." The words landed harder than any accusation had earlier, because Rachel Kim didn't speculate, she verified, and she didn't speak unless she was certain. A ripple moved through the room. Subtle, but undeniable. Mark Reynolds leaned back slightly now, not confidently, not comfortably, but carefully, as if recalculating. Naomi continued tracing the logs, deeper now, more precise. She opened a final layer, and there it appeared. A single access point, unfamiliar, unauthorized, not hers, not any junior staff, higher, much higher. Naomi stopped. Just for a second. The room held its breath. She expanded the entry, displayed it across every screen. The access level was unmistakable. Executive clearance. Above her, above most people in that room. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not just doubt anymore. Certainty. This wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a glitch, it was intentional, and whoever had done it had power. No one spoke, not immediately, because now the question wasn't whether Naomi had done it. It was, who had? Naomi didn't answer that question. Not yet. She simply stepped back slightly, her eyes still on the screen, letting the evidence sit there. Unchallenged. Unavoidable. And for the first time since the meeting began, the room was no longer judging her. It was afraid of what the truth might reveal next. The invisible hand. The room did not move. No one spoke. The glowing screen held the entire boardroom in place like gravity had shifted and no one knew how to stand anymore. The executive-level access point Naomi had revealed remained expanded across every display. Clean, undeniable, impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The silence now was no longer judgment. It was hesitation. Naomi didn't look back. She kept her focus on the system, because what she had shown so far was not the conclusion. It was only the doorway. She moved again. Her fingers returned to the console, pulling up deeper layers. Archived logs, system redundancies, hidden pathways most users never knew existed. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged. But something in the rhythm of her movements had shifted. She wasn't searching anymore, she was closing in. Behind her, Ethan Cole sat forward, elbows resting lightly on the table now, no longer pretending to be passive. His blue eyes scanned every detail Naomi revealed, his mind racing to keep up. 3 months ago, he had struggled to understand even basic system flows. Now, watching Naomi reconstruct something this precise in real time, he realized he was witnessing something else entirely. Not just skill, but control. Across the room, Mark Reynolds no longer leaned forward. He leaned back, not comfortably, strategically. His broad shoulders remained squared, his expression controlled, but the stillness he held on to felt forced now. His gray eyes flicked once, just once, toward Naomi's screen, and then away again. He adjusted his sleeve, a habit he only showed when tension slipped through his composure. Naomi opened another data branch. Cross-referencing external access routes, she said quietly, still not addressing anyone, still not defending herself. She filtered the timeline, compressed it, rebuilt it. The scattered anomalies began aligning. And then, a pattern emerged. Ethan saw it first in fragments, repeated access windows, short bursts, timed precisely between system audits. Too precise to be accidental. Naomi expanded the pattern across the main display. "There's an alias running parallel to the primary account," she said. Her voice remained level, but the words carried weight. An alias. That changed everything, because an alias meant intention, planning. Someone hadn't just accessed the system, they had hidden themselves inside it. Rachel Kim stepped closer again, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses as she examined the structure Naomi had uncovered. She didn't interrupt this time. She simply watched, her analytical mind reconstructing the logic in real time. Naomi isolated the alias, a string of characters, meaningless at first glance, but not random. She began decoding the access behavior instead of the name. Login patterns, time intervals, priority overrides. She wasn't trying to read the label, she was identifying the owner. Mark spoke again, his voice sharper now. "This is speculation," he said. "Aliases exist in every system." Naomi didn't stop, didn't respond, didn't even turn. And that silence hit harder than any argument, because now everyone could see it. He wasn't guiding the room anymore, he was reacting to it. Naomi traced the alias back, layer by layer. Every system left traces, even when someone tried to erase them. She pulled up a secondary log, hidden deeper, one that tracked administrative overrides. And there, the alias intersected with a real account, for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Naomi froze the frame, zoomed in, enhanced the data string, and displayed it across the room. The name didn't appear, but the access ID did, and in this system, that ID meant something. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. She turned her head slowly toward the table, towards Mark Reynolds, because she recognized it. Before anyone else could speak, the door at the back of the room opened quietly. A woman stepped in. Lena Brooks. Lena Brooks was a 35-year-old African-American corporate attorney, medium height with a poised, controlled presence that carried quiet authority. Her warm, brown skin contrasted with the sharp lines of her tailored black suit. Her hair was pulled into a precise bun, and her dark eyes held a focus that rarely softened. She moved with intention, each step measured. Years ago, Lena had built her career by exposing a contract manipulation case that nearly destroyed a rival firm. But the victory came at a cost. She had learned then that truth alone didn't protect you. Power decided when truth mattered. She paused just inside the room, taking in the screens, the silence, the tension, and then she stepped forward, positioning herself just behind the line of executives, not fully part of them, but close enough to observe. Her gaze moved to Naomi, then to the data, and she understood immediately. Naomi continued. "This alias doesn't operate independently," she said. "It's tethered." She pulled up the connection log, expanded it. The room seemed to shrink as the data unfolded. The alias, the access ID, the executive clearance, all converging, all pointing in the same direction, Mark's direction. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It spread, slowly, across faces, across posture, across silence. Ethan felt it hit him first as disbelief, then clarity, because now There was no version of this story where Naomi was guilty, only one where she had been chosen. Mark leaned forward again suddenly, his voice cutting through the room. "This is a misinterpretation," he said quickly. "You're connecting data points without—" "Without context?" Naomi said, for the first time. She spoke over him. She turned slightly, not fully, just enough for her voice to carry directly toward him. "You accessed the system at 2:13 a.m., she said calmly, 3 days before the breach." Mark's jaw tightened. Naomi continued. "You requested a temporary override, another pause, then you created the alias." The words landed with precision. No emotion, no hesitation, just fact. The room didn't react immediately. Because it couldn't. Because this wasn't accusation anymore. This was reconstruction. Daniel Whitmore finally moved. Just a step. But it was the first movement he had made since the screens turned on. His gaze shifted from Naomi to Mark. And for the first time, there was something in his expression. Not doubt, not confusion, recognition. Naomi stepped back from the console. Not retreating. Finished. She didn't say anything else. Didn't need to, because everything she needed to prove was already in front of them. The alias, the access, the timeline, the connection. Mark Reynolds, the man who had spoken first, the man who had guided the accusation, the man who had pointed at her, now sat in silence. And this time, the silence belonged to him. No one rushed to defend him. No one spoke, because the room understood something now. They hadn't just watched someone prove innocence. They had watched someone reveal control. The invisible hand behind the story they were ready to believe, and in that moment, the narrative collapsed, not loudly, but completely. The second story. The silence from the boardroom didn't break. It fractured. Not with noise, but with realization. The screens were still glowing. Mark Reynolds was still seated. Naomi was still standing, but the center of gravity in the room had shifted, and not everyone was looking at the same place anymore. Because while Naomi had exposed a truth, Lena Brooks saw something deeper. She didn't move immediately. She stood just inside the room for a few seconds longer than necessary, watching not just the data, but the reactions. Who avoided eye contact? Who leaned back? Who suddenly seemed smaller than before? Patterns. Lena had built her entire career on patterns. She stepped forward slowly, heels quiet against the polished floor, and moved closer to the screen where Naomi's data still hovered, frozen in place like evidence that refused to fade. But Lena wasn't looking at the alias. She was looking at the room. Then, without asking permission, she turned slightly toward Daniel Whitmore. "We need to pull HR records," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence. Whitmore didn't respond immediately. He watched her. Then Naomi. Then the screen. "Why?" one of the executives asked, his tone uneasy, as if he already sensed the answer. Lena didn't look at him. "Because this doesn't start with Naomi," she said. That landed differently. Not sharp, not explosive, but heavy. Naomi's eyes shifted for the first time, not to the screen, not to Mark, but to Lena. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Lena stepped closer to the console. "Do you still have system access?" she asked Naomi quietly. Naomi nodded once. Lena gestured lightly. "Then let's not stop at the system." Naomi understood immediately. She moved again, opening a separate interface, internal records, personnel files, archived reports, the kind of data that rarely appeared in boardrooms unless something had already gone very wrong. Ethan Cole watched, his curiosity sharpening into focus. He didn't fully understand what Lena was doing yet, but he could feel it. This was no longer about a single incident. Naomi accessed HR logs, filtered by department, then by timeline, then by termination records. The screen changed, rows of names, dates, reasons, At first glance, nothing unusual, but Lena leaned in slightly. Sort by flagged cases, she said. Naomi complied. The list narrowed. 3 names remained. Ethan felt his stomach tighten slightly, because even before he read them, he saw the pattern. All 3 were black employees, different roles, different departments, same outcome: termination. "Expand the first one," Lena said. Naomi opened the file. Marcus Hill. Marcus Hill had been a 29-year-old data analyst, tall, lean, with deep brown skin and a quiet demeanor that made him easy to overlook in large rooms. His colleagues had described him as precise, reserved, and intensely focused. He had grown up in Chicago, the first in his family to graduate college, and carried that responsibility with him into every job. But 3 years ago, he had been terminated for data mishandling. No formal hearing, no full audit, just a conclusion. Ethan frowned slightly because that phrase felt familiar. Too familiar. "Second file," Lena said. Naomi opened it. Tanya Brooks. Tanya Brooks had been a 34-year-old operations manager. Medium height with a confident posture and a direct, no-nonsense communication style. Her dark skin and sharp features gave her a commanding presence, but it was her voice that people remembered. Clear, firm, unwilling to be ignored. She had built her reputation by fixing failing teams, but 2 years ago she had been removed for process violations. Again? No full investigation, just a decision. Ethan shifted in his seat. Now it wasn't coincidence. It was repetition. "Third," Lena said. Naomi hesitated for half a second, then opened it. Andre Wallace. Andre Wallace had been a 41-year-old senior systems engineer, broad-shouldered, calm, with a quiet authority that came from years of experience. His deep voice and measured tone made him someone others relied on, even if they rarely acknowledged it openly. He had been one of the earliest contributors to the company's infrastructure, but 18 months ago he had been dismissed for unauthorized system access. The room didn't react immediately, because now, the pattern wasn't just visible. It was undeniable. 3 cases, 3 accusations, 3 removals, all tied to system-related claims, all resolved without full transparency. And now, Naomi. Ethan felt something shift in him. Not confusion, not doubt. Understanding. They were all blamed the same way, he said quietly, almost to himself. Lena glanced at him briefly, just enough to acknowledge he had seen it. "Yes," she said, and that single word carried weight. Mark Reynolds remained silent, but his stillness had changed. It wasn't control anymore. It was containment. Because now, the room wasn't just looking at Naomi. It was looking backward, re-evaluating everything. Naomi scrolled further, digging deeper into each case. "Internal reports?" Lena asked. Naomi searched, paused, then opened a restricted archive. A document appeared, flagged, unresolved. "Read the summary," Lena said. Naomi scanned it quickly. Her jaws tightened slightly. "What is it?" Whitmore asked. Naomi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she expanded the document across the screen. Rachel Kim stepped closer again, her eyes scanning the text. Then, her expression shifted. Subtle, but real. "This was never finalized," Rachel said quietly. The report detailed inconsistencies, missing data, contradictions, evidence that didn't fully support the accusations. And yet, each case had been closed, without follow-up, without correction. Ethan felt a cold realization settle in. "They didn't prove anything," he said. Lena looked at the screen, then at the room. "They didn't need to," she replied. Silence. Because now, the story had changed again. This wasn't just about Mark Reynolds. This wasn't just about Naomi. This was about a system, one that didn't need evidence, only alignment, and the right target. Naomi stepped back slightly from the console, not retreating, just creating space. Because what had been uncovered didn't need explanation anymore. It needed acknowledgement. and that was something no one in the room was ready to give. Not yet. Daniel Whitmore remained still, but his stillness now carried weight. Because, for the first time, he wasn't observing a situation. He was inside it. The boardroom, once controlled, now felt exposed, not by noise, but by truth, and the most dangerous part was that it had been there all along, hidden, ignored, allowed, until now. The breaking point. The room no longer felt like a place where decisions were made. It felt like a place where consequences arrived. The screens were still filled with data. Layered timelines, intersecting access points, HR records, unresolved reports. Everything Naomi had uncovered now existed at once, not as separate discoveries, but as a single, unbroken chain. The alias, the executive access, the past cases, the missing investigations, it all aligned. Perfectly. Naomi didn't move. She stood slightly to the side of the console now, no longer actively typing, no longer reconstructing. Her role in the moment had shifted. She wasn't building the truth anymore. She had already done it. Now the room had to face it. Ethan Cole felt it more than anyone. The shift. 3 minutes ago, he had been watching something unfold. Now he realized he was inside something collapsing. His fingers tightened slightly around the edge of his tablet, the device he had been holding quietly throughout the meeting. He hadn't intended to use it, at least not at first, but instinct had told him to keep recording, not just the screen, the room, the reactions, the timing, because something had felt off from the beginning. Now he understood why. Across the table, Mark Reynolds leaned forward again, this time more aggressively. The restraint he had held onto earlier had begun to fracture. His voice came faster now, sharper, trying to regain control before it disappeared completely. "This is being taken out of context," he said, his tone tight but louder than before. "You're combining unrelated data points and turning them into a narrative." Naomi didn't respond. Lena didn't respond. Even Rachel Kim remained silent, because at this point, context didn't matter. The pattern did. Mark's voice continued, but something about it had changed. It no longer carried authority. It carried urgency, the kind that came when someone realized they were no longer leading the conversation. "You don't have full visibility," he pressed. "There are security layers, protocols." "Then show them." The voice came from across the table, firm, controlled, and for the first time, not neutral. Daniel Whitmore had spoken. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to, but the interruption cut cleanly through the room. Mark stopped. Just for a second. Whitmore took a slow step forward. His expression hadn't softened, but it had changed. The distance he had maintained throughout the meeting was gone. Now, he was no longer observing from above. He was standing inside the situation. "Explain the access," Whitmore said, his tone measured. Not accusing, but not protecting either. Mark's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out immediately, because now, he didn't control the timing. Naomi stepped forward again, not to take over, just to finish what she had started. She tapped the console once, bringing the full timeline back into focus. Every layer collapsed into a single view, clear, linear, undeniable. Entry points, system overrides, alias creation, data extraction. It all sat there, aligned to the second. "This is the sequence," she said calmly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Initial access, override request, alias deployment, data extraction." Each phrase matched a visual, each step locked into place. Mark tried to interrupt again, but this time, he was too late, because Ethan stood up. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't planned, but it was enough. All eyes shifted toward him. Ethan swallowed once, his throat dry but his voice steady when he spoke. "I have something," he said. The words felt heavier than he expected. He stepped forward slightly, holding up the tablet. "I recorded the session," he added, "from the moment the accusation was made. A ripple moved through the room, subtle, but immediate. Mark's expression changed. Not visibly enough for most people, but enough. Ethan continued, gaining confidence as he spoke. "The timing doesn't match the narrative," he said. "The accusation came before any system review, before any verification." He turned the tablet slightly, showing a playback. Not the data, the room, Mark speaking first, Mark guiding the conclusion, Mark establishing the direction, before Naomi ever touched the system. The difference was small, but critical because now intent was visible. Lena stepped forward fully into the room, no longer observing from the edge. She moved with purpose, her heels steady, her posture straight. In her hand was a slim folder, unmarked, but deliberate. She placed it on the table. "This isn't just about the system," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, but it carried something else now. Weight. She opened the folder. Inside were documents, printed, structured, organized. 3 prior cases, she continued, all involving black employees, all dismissed under similar claims, all lacking full investigation. She slid the top document forward. Marcus Hill, then another. Tanya Brooks, then another. Andre Wallace. Each name sat in front of the executives like something they could no longer ignore. "Internal reports flagged inconsistencies," Lena said. "Those reports were never finalized." Rachel Kim stepped closer again, scanning the documents, confirming what she had already seen on the system. "They were closed prematurely," she said quietly. The room shifted again. But this time, it wasn't subtle. 2 executives near the middle of the table exchanged a glance, not uncertain, decisive. One of them leaned back, exhaling slowly. Another adjusted his position, turning slightly away from Mark. Small movements, but clear, because now the alignment was breaking. Mark saw it. Of course he did. His eyes moved quickly across the room, reading the shift, recalculating positions. But there was nothing left to anchor to. No one stepped in to support him. No one interrupted Lena. No one dismissed the evidence. For the first time, he was alone. Naomi didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been shown. Daniel Whitmore looked at the documents, then at the screen, then finally at Mark Reynolds. This time, his gaze didn't pass over him. It stayed, and there was no ambiguity in it anymore. Whitmore straightened slightly, not dramatically, but enough, because the decision didn't need to be spoken. It had already formed. The boardroom, once controlled by quiet power, now held something else entirely. Exposure, not just of one man, but of a system, one that had operated quietly, efficiently, until it didn't. And now, it was visible. To everyone. Collapse and rebuild. The meeting didn't end with a decision. It ended with a shift. No formal vote, no raised hands, no closing remarks. Just a quiet understanding that whatever structure had held the room together before no longer existed. Daniel Whitmore was the first to move. He didn't look at anyone else as he stepped forward, his posture straight but no longer distant. The calm authority he had carried into the room was still there, but it was different now. Less controlled. More aware. "Mark Reynolds," he said, his voice steady. "Step away from the table." There was no hesitation this time, no room for interpretation. Mark didn't respond immediately. For a brief second, he remained seated, as if refusing to accept that the balance had fully shifted. But the room had already moved on from him. No one looked to him for guidance. No one waited for his response. He stood slowly. Mark Reynolds still looked composed on the surface. His suit still perfectly fitted, his posture still upright. But the confidence that once defined him had hollowed out. His gray eyes no longer scanned the room for control. They searched for something else. Support. There was none. Without another word, he stepped back from the table. And just like that, He was no longer part of it. The door opened again, this time not quietly. Two members of internal security stepped in, not aggressively, but with clear intent. One of them, Officer Daniel Ruiz, a 42-year-old Latino-American security officer, tall with a solid grounded build, carried himself with calm authority. His tan skin and steady dark eyes gave him a presence that didn't need force to be respected. Years of working in high-pressure environments had taught him when to speak, and when silence was enough. "Mr. Reynolds," Ruiz said, gesturing toward the exit. Mark didn't argue, didn't resist. He walked. And the moment he crossed the threshold of the boardroom, the last piece of the old structure collapsed with him. The door closed behind him. The room remained still. But now, the silence was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was open, uncertain. Daniel Whitmore turned back toward the table. For the first time since the meeting began, his gaze moved directly to Naomi. And this time, there was no distance in it. "I was wrong," he said. The words were simple, direct, and they didn't come easily, because for a man like Whitmore, admitting error wasn't part of the system he had built. But the system had already been exposed, and ignoring that now would only deepen it. Naomi didn't respond immediately. She studied him for a brief moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something more measured. Evaluation. Because an apology meant nothing without change. Lena Brooks stepped forward again, this time fully positioning herself at the center of the table. Her presence was no longer observational. It was structural. "This doesn't end with Mark," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried clarity. "It can't." Whitmore nodded once. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. "Then we start now," he said. That was all Lena needed. She opened her folder again, but this time, it wasn't just evidence. It was direction. First, internal review, she said, independent, not tied to current leadership. She turned a page. Second, reinstatement audits for previous cases, Marcus Hill, Tanya Brooks, Andre Wallace. Rachel Kim stepped closer, her analytical mind already moving ahead. "I'll handle system verification," she said. "No internal filtering." Lena nodded slightly. Third, policy reconstruction, reporting structure, escalation channels, accountability checkpoints. Each point landed with intention, because this wasn't reaction anymore, it was reconstruction. Across the table, the executives who had once remained silent now leaned forward, not out of authority but necessity. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that participation was no longer optional. Ethan Cole remained standing where he had presented the recording, his tablet still in his hand. But now, his posture had changed. The uncertainty that had defined him earlier had faded. He had chosen a side, and it had mattered. Whitmore glanced toward him. "What's your name?" he asked. Ethan blinked once, slightly caught off guard. "Ethan Cole," he said. Whitmore nodded. "You kept the record," he said. "That matters." It wasn't praise, but it was recognition, and in this room, that was enough. Ethan sat back down slowly, but something had shifted in him, too. He was no longer just observing the system. He was part of what came next. Naomi stepped away from the console now, moving toward the table, not as someone being questioned, but as someone being included. Whitmore turned to her again. "We need leadership on this," he said, "someone who understands the system, technically and structurally." A pause. Then, "I want you to lead it." The room didn't react with surprise, because at this point, there was no one else. Naomi held his gaze. She didn't respond immediately, because this wasn't the moment she had worked for. This was something else. A test of whether anything had truly changed. "You don't need a leader," she said calmly. Whitmore didn't interrupt. "You need a system that doesn't fail before it's tested," she continued. Her voice remained steady, controlled. "But if I take that role—" She paused, just long enough. It won't be to fix one situation. The room stayed silent, because now they were listening. It will be to change all of it, she finished. Lena watched her carefully. Rachel remained still. Ethan leaned forward again slightly. Whitmore nodded once, not hesitant, not uncertain. "Then that's what we do," he said. And for the first time since the meeting began, there was alignment in the room, not based on power, but on truth. Outside the glass walls, the city remained unchanged. Traffic moved, lights flickered, life continued. But inside the boardroom, everything had shifted. Not because one person was removed, but because something deeper had been exposed. And now, for the first time, it was being rebuilt. The woman they couldn't ignore. Weeks later, the same boardroom on the 47th floor no longer felt like a place that erased people. It felt like a place that remembered. The skyline outside remained unchanged. Glass towers reflecting winter light, traffic flowing far below. But inside, the air had shifted in ways no one could ignore. The long polished table was still there. The screens still lined the walls, the chairs still formed the same circle of power, but the people sitting in them were different. Not all of them, but enough. Naomi Carter walked through the door without hesitation. She wore the same kind of suit she always had. Charcoal, simple, precise, but something about her presence had changed. Not louder, not heavier, clearer. Her posture was no longer defensive or measured against expectation. It was steady, grounded in something that no longer depended on approval. The room didn't quiet because she entered. It was already quiet, waiting. Not for instruction, for direction. Naomi took her place, not at the end of the table where she had once stood alone, but closer to the center. Not because someone had assigned it to her, because it made sense now. Across from her sat Lena Brooks. Lena's presence had shifted as well. She was no longer just the attorney who stepped in when something went wrong. She was now officially appointed as the company's head of ethics and compliance, a role that hadn't existed before this moment. Lena Brooks still carried the same composed, precise demeanor, but there was a new layer to her authority. Not borrowed, built. She had spent the last few weeks reconstructing policy frameworks, rewriting reporting channels, and establishing independent review structures. Her reputation had already been solid, but now it had a platform. She didn't enforce silence. She dismantled it. Next to Naomi sat Ethan Cole. Ethan no longer looked like someone trying to understand the room. He belonged in it now. His posture was more confident, his movements more deliberate. His once slightly disorganized appearance had sharpened, cleaner lines, clearer focus, but he hadn't lost the instinct that had defined him from the beginning. He was still observant, still questioning, still paying attention to what others missed. He had been formally offered a permanent position, assistant analyst under Naomi's direct team, but more than that, he had become something else, a witness who chose to act. Across the table, Rachel Kim remained in her usual position, but even she had changed in subtle ways. Her posture was less guarded, her presence more engaged. She had taken over system auditing with full autonomy, ensuring that no internal process could be filtered or redirected without traceability. For the first time, her role had real authority. Daniel Whitmore entered last, but not the same way he had before. He no longer walked into the room as someone who owned it. He entered as someone accountable to it. His suit remained immaculate, his posture controlled, but the distance he once carried was gone. In its place was something quieter. Awareness. He took his seat without ceremony, and for a moment, no one spoke, because this silence wasn't empty, it was deliberate. Naomi looked around the room, not scanning for judgment, not measuring reactions, just observing, and what she saw was different. People met her gaze now, not all of them, but enough. She turned slightly toward the screen. "Let's begin," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and no one questioned it. The system came alive again, but this time it wasn't for defense. It was for design. Naomi pulled up the new framework. Not just data logs, structure, oversight pathways, escalation routes. Every flaw that had once existed had been mapped, not hidden, not minimized, exposed, and now rebuilt. "This is the new reporting structure," she said, guiding the room through the layers. "No single point of control, no isolated access without cross-verification." Rachel nodded slightly, already understanding the implications. "Every override leaves a trace," Naomi continued. "Every trace is reviewed independently," Lena added quietly. "And every review is documented outside internal management." The room followed, not passively but actively. Questions were asked, not to challenge, but to understand. Ethan took notes, his focus sharp, occasionally glancing at Naomi, not for approval, but alignment. Because now, they were building something together. A system that didn't depend on silence, or assumption, or convenience. A system that required truth. Naomi moved through the final section. Team structure. She paused briefly, then brought up the new assignments. Diverse, intentional, balanced across roles and authority levels, not symbolic, functional. These positions were selected based on performance metrics and audit reviews, she said. No hesitation, no explanation beyond that, because it didn't need one. Lena glanced at the list, then at Naomi. A small nod. Approval. Not granted. Shared. Whitmore remained silent throughout. But when Naomi finished, he spoke. "This is what should have existed before," he said. Not as justification, as admission. No one responded immediately because acknowledgement didn't need reinforcement. Naomi closed the final screen. The room settled again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was stable. She looked around once more. And this time, she allowed herself to notice it. No one looked away. No one avoided her presence. No one questioned why she was there. Because that question didn't exist anymore. For the first time since she had entered this building years ago, Naomi Carter was not being evaluated. She was being followed, not because of a title, not because of authority, but because of what she had done, what she had revealed, and what she had refused to ignore. The meeting concluded without tension. No abrupt endings, no unresolved silence, just a clear understanding of what came next. As people began to stand, gather their materials, and move toward the exit, something subtle remained in the room. Respect, not forced, not performed. Real. Naomi remained seated for a moment longer, not because she had to, but because she could. And for the first time, that difference mattered. She stood, turned toward the glass wall, looked out over the city. The same skyline, the same buildings, but no longer distant, because now she wasn't trying to reach it. She was part of it. And behind her, the room that once questioned her existence now depended on it. This story is not just about clearing a name. It is about what happens when truth is stronger than fear, and when one person refuses to stay silent in a system that was never built for them. Naomi Carter did not win because someone helped her. She won because she chose to stand, to think, and to act when everyone else chose comfort over truth. In everyday life, many of us face smaller versions of this moment. Maybe it is being overlooked at work. Maybe it is being judged too quickly. Maybe it is seeing something unfair and choosing to stay quiet because it feels safer. This story reminds us that silence can protect a system, but it never protects justice. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm, stay focused, and let the truth speak through your actions. It also teaches us something deeper about how we treat others. We must be careful not to judge too quickly, not to follow the crowd, and not to assume that someone is wrong just because they stand alone. Real strength is not in power or position. It is in integrity, courage, and the willingness to do what is right, even when it is difficult. At the same time, this story is a quiet criticism of environments that allow unfairness to exist without question. Systems do not become unjust overnight. They become unjust when people ignore small wrongs again and again. Change begins when someone decides that enough is enough. So take a moment to reflect. In your life, are you the one staying silent, or the one willing to stand for what is right? Are you judging too quickly, or are you seeking the truth? Every small choice matters. If this story touched you, take a second to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us what you think or where you are watching from. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe in truth, fairness, and standing strong even when you are alone, consider subscribing so we can keep bringing you stories like this. May God bless you, guide you, and give you strength in every challenge you face. And if you believe that truth always finds its way to the light, type Amen in the comments and stand with that belief,